All right, another lecture on philosophy. This is by Professor Alvin Plantinga, or Alvin Plantinga. He used to teach, he was the, John O'Brien held the chair of philosophy at Notre Dame. Protestant philosopher over at Notre Dame University, now retired. Had the privilege of flying him out to California and lecture at a school we had, a private college called the Academy of Christian Apologetics. And we teamed up with Biola just to get a bigger crowd, and this is the lecture that he gave. A little bit of background: one of the most brilliant philosophers used to make jokes at Notre Dame that he would be the first Protestant pope, and so on. In any event, when Alvin Plantinga takes on a topic, a lot of people get nervous. I disagree with him on various points. One is on divine simplicity. He's of the view that God is made of parts. Having said that, brilliant philosopher, and when he took on the topic of evolution, and specifically against naturalism, the idea that the universe is just a physical machine, self-sustained, guided by, natural law, but there's no designer, no God, etc., no divine intelligence out there whatsoever. He phrased the argument brilliantly. He says it's an evolutionary argument against naturalism, an evolution type of argument against naturalistic atheism, in that sense. In any event, brilliant man, very nice fella. I went hiking with him up in Pasadena Mountains. He loves to hike, very humble, and has taught me a lot. Okay, so now, an evolutionary argument against naturalism by Professor Alvin Plantinga. The following is the outline of the lecture that he gave a few years back. The problem. I'm going to state a few definitions, and then we move into the paper. Theism is the idea that we human beings have been created by a wholly good, all-powerful, and all-knowing person, one who has knowledge, aims at intentions, and acts to accomplish them, which would be God and his creation. Now, naturalism, on the other hand, is the theistic picture minus God, which would be some of the proponents: Carl Sagan, Stephen Jay Gould, David Armstrong, the later Darwin. Remember, Darwin studied theology at Cambridge back in the day. And then, of course, you have John Dewey and Bertrand Russell. And the next set of definitions, to understand where we're going, we got theism now, we got naturalism, and we have what he calls cognitive faculties. Cognitive faculties are the powers or faculties of capacities whereby we have knowledge and form belief through memory, perception, reason, maybe others. Okay? Now, what about theism, the belief in a personal God, as he stated earlier, and the reliability of our cognitive faculties? Thomas Aquinas says, quote, "Since human beings are said to be in the image of God in virtue of their having a nature that includes an intellect, such a nature is most in the image of God in virtue of being most able to imitate God. And only in rational creatures is there found a likeness of God which counts as an image," not in the animalistic world. As far as a likeness of the divine nature is concerned, rational creatures seem somehow to attain a representation of that type in virtue of imitating God, not only in this, that he is and lives, but especially in this, that he understands. So in that sense, we can rely on our cognitive faculties. Yes, they're fallen. Yes, we're finite, but there's enough there in order for us to understand, specifically what God has revealed to us. Now, most of us would think on reflection that at least a function or purpose of our cognitive faculties is to provide us with true beliefs. Moreover, we go on to think that when they function properly in accord with our design plan, then for the most part they do precisely that. Faculties much better adapted to reach the truth in some areas than others, say for example elementary arithmetic and logic and the perception of middle-sized objects under ordinary conditions, etc., remembering certain sorts of things, and so forth. Things get more difficult, however, when it comes to an accurate reconstruction of what it was like to, say, be a 5th century BC Greek, not to mention a blind bat. and working at the limits of our powers, meaning what? Limits of our powers in contemporary cosmology, and so forth. Still, there is a problem, though, here for the naturalist. At any rate, for the naturalist who thinks that we and our cognitive faculties arrived upon the scene after some billions of years of evolution by way of natural selection, genetic drift, and other blind processes working on such sources as genetic variation, as random genetic mutation. Richard Dawkins, according to Peter Medawar, says, quote, one of the most brilliant and rising generations of biologists once learned over and remarked at A.J. Ayer was another thinker. They had like this candlelit Oxford dinner back in the day. And he says here he couldn't imagine being an atheist before 1859. Although atheism might have been logically tenable before Darwin, he says, quote, Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. And you can find that in The Blind Watchmaker. Darwin goes on, all appearances to the contrary about the watchmaker here. The only watchmaker is nature in the blind forces of physics, albeit deployed in a very special way. A true watchmaker has foresight. He designs his cogs and springs and plans their interconnections with a future purpose in his mind's eye. Natural selection, the blind, unconscious, automatic process, which Darwin discovered, didn't discover it, because it isn't there. But let's just suppose he did. And which we know is the explanation, is the explanation for the existence and apparently purposeful form of all life, has no purpose at all. If it can be said to play the role of watchmaker nature, it is the blind watchmaker. This is what Dawkins would say. In any event, now Dawkins thinks Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist, but perhaps Dawkins is dead wrong here. Perhaps the truth lies in the opposite direction. Their ultimate purpose is survival, not production of true beliefs. Remember now, the principle of survival of the fittest is really the chief goal of Darwinian evolution. Its ultimate goal is to survive. The strong survive. Has nothing to do with producing true beliefs. And this is where philosopher Plantinga comes in, and I think he's got a good axe to grind against naturalism. Now, Patricia Churchland says, boiled down to essentials, a nervous system enables the organism to succeed in what is called the 4 F's. Set aside the joke here: feeding, fleeing, fighting, and reproducing. The principal core of nervous system is to get the body parts where they should be in order that the organism may survive. Improvements in, say, sensory motor control confer an evolutionary advantage, according to her, a fancier style of representing its advantageous so long as it is geared to the organism's way of life and enhances that organism's chances of survival. Truth, whatever it is, definitely takes the hindmost. Now, Quine and Karl Popper, Popper says here, since we have evolved and survived, we may be pretty sure that our hypotheses and guesses as to what the world is like are mostly correct. Quine says that he finds encouragement in Darwin. Unquote here, there is some encouragement in Darwin. If people's innate spacing of qualities is a gene-linked trait, then the spacing that has made for the most successful inductions will have tended to predominate through natural selection. Creatures inveterately wrong in their inductions have a pathetic but praiseworthy tendency to die before reproducing their kind. Quine finds a great deal more encouragement in Darwin than Darwin did himself. With me, says Darwin, unquote, the horrid thought or horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which may be developed from the mind of lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind, if there are any convictions in such a mind, unquote. Now, Quine and Popper on one side, and Darwin and Churchland on the other, who is correct here? Who is right? But can we sharpen the question? What precisely is the argument here all about? Darwin and Churchland seems to believe that naturalistic evolution gives one a reason to doubt that human cognitive faculties are reliable, in that they produce mostly true beliefs. Call this Darwin's doubt. Quine and Popper, on the other hand, apparently hold that evolution gives us reason to believe that human cognitive faculties do produce, for the most part, true beliefs of a sort. How could you understand this dispute? Darwin's doubt is the next heading. One possibility. Perhaps Darwin and Churchland mean to propose that a certain conditional probability is low. The probability being that human cognitive faculties being reliable, given that the human cognitive faculties have been produced by evolution, unguided by the hand of God, as we see in Dawkins' blind evolution. Now, if naturalistic evolution is true, then our cognitive faculties will have resulted from blind mechanisms like natural selection, working on sources of genetic variation, such as random genetic mutation. We said that before. And the ultimate purpose or function would be what? Churchland would say here, of our cognitive faculties, if indeed they have a purpose or function, would be survival of individual species, gene, or genotype. But then it is unlikely that they have the production of true beliefs as function. True beliefs is key here. In short, would you know evolution is true if naturalistic evolution were true? No, you wouldn't. That's really the answer here, in a very simple form. So the probability of our faculties being reliable, given naturalistic evolution, would be fairly low. Popper and Quine, again, on the other side, judged that probability fairly high. All right. Now, N, we're going to call N, write this down, N is naturalistic naturalism, which is crucial to metaphysical naturalism, of course, where the view is that there was no such person as God, there's no God of traditional theism. So N is metaphysical naturalism. E like Edward, stands for human cognitive faculties have arisen by way of evolution, as conceived now by evolutionary science. R stands for the claim that our cognitive faculties are reliable. So far N, E, and R. Naturalistic evolution, E, evolution, R, the claim that our cognitive faculties are reliable. And the question is, what is the probability of R, the claim that our cognitive faculties are reliable, given naturalistic, metaphysical naturalism, and evolution, that human cognitive faculties have arisen by way of evolution? What are the chances of probability of R given N and E? Darwin and Churchland proposed that this probability is relatively low, again, while Quine and Popper think it is fairly high. Now, the doubt developed here. Suppose we think, first, not about ourselves or our ancestors, but about a hypothetical population of creatures rather like ourselves on a planet similar to Earth. Darwin proposed that we think about another species, such as monkeys, right? Suppose these creatures have cognitive faculties. Not the monkeys, but the people similar to us on another planet. Suppose these creatures have cognitive faculties, they hold beliefs, they change beliefs, they make inferences, and so on. And suppose these creatures have arisen by way of the selection processes endorsed by contemporary evolutionary thought. What then is the probability that their faculties are reliable? What is P, R, N, and E specified, not to us, but to them? According to Quine and Popper, rather high. Belief is connected with action in such a way that extensive false belief would lead to a maladaptive behavior, in which case it is likely that the ancestors of those creatures would have displayed that pathetic but praiseworthy tendency Quine mentions. But first, perhaps it is likely that their behavior is, or was, adaptive. Why not? But nothing follows about their beliefs. So everything depends upon the way in which their behavior is related to their beliefs. Little side point here, A. Maybe their beliefs do not cause their behavior, like epiphenomenalism, according to T.H. Huxley. If so, they would be invisible to evolution. And then the fact that they arose during the evolutionary history of these beings would confer no probability at all on the idea that they are mostly true or mostly nearly true rather than wildly false. Indeed, the probability of their being mostly true would have to be estimated as fairly low. The probability that a randomly chosen large set of propositions contains vastly more true beliefs than false beliefs is low. It could be that one of these creatures believes that he's that elegant, participant at this Oxford dinner, when in fact he's slogging his way through some primeval swamp, desperately fighting off hungry crocodiles. That is so planning it. All right, J.M. Smith, quote, a few years ago, he wrote that he had never understood why organisms have feelings. After all, orthodox biologists believe that behavior, however complex, is governed entirely by biochemistry, and that the attendant sensations such as fear, pain, wonder, love are just shadows cast by that biochemistry, not themselves vital to the organism's behavior. All right, B, beliefs do indeed cause behavior, but only by virtue of their electrochemical properties, not by virtue of their content. All right, this possibility is said to be the quote-unquote received opinion by Rob Cummings. You can see that in Meaning and Mental Representation, his work. If you accept materialism, then we must be reminded that it's hard to see any other alternative. Now C, a third possibility, it could be that the belief caused behavior by way of content but is maladaptive, and if so, it's again low. D, the belief of our hypothetical creatures on another planet caused their behavior and also in an adaptive way. Probability on this possibility together with naturalistic materialism and evolutionary means having reliable cognitive faculties, that the cognitive faculties are reliable, would again be low. All right, not as high as you might think. Beliefs do not casually produce behavior by themselves. It is beliefs, desires, and other factors that do so together. Then the problem is that clearly there will be any number of different patterns of beliefs and desire that would issue in the same action. And among those, there will be many in which these beliefs are wildly false. Paul is a prehistoric hominid, all right? The exigencies of survival call for him to display tiger avoidance behavior. There would be many behaviors that are appropriate. Fleeing, for example, or climbing a steep rock, or crawling into a hole too small to admit the tiger, or leaping into a handy lake. Pick any such approximate specific behavior. Paul engages in such behavior, not Paul the Apostle, just an example here. We think because, sensible as he is, he has an aversion to being eaten and believes that doing these things is a good means of thwarting the tiger's intentions. Of course, fleeing, run. But clearly this avoidance of behavior could result from 1,000 other belief-desire combinations. Indefinitely, many other belief-desire systems would fit that scenario well. Perhaps Paul very much likes the idea of being eaten, but when he sees the tiger, always runs off looking for a better prospect. Well, possible, but not very likely, because he thinks it is unlikely that the tiger he sees will eat him. This will then get his body parts in the right place so far as survival is concerned, without involving much by way of true belief. Or perhaps he thinks the tiger is a large, friendly, cuddly pussycat and wants to pet it. But he also believes that the best way to pet it is to run away from it. Or perhaps he confuses running towards it with running away from it, believing that the action is really running away from it, that it is running towards it. Or perhaps he thinks the tiger is a regularly reoccurring illusion. There is no tiger after all. So obviously in this case his cognitive faculties would not be up to snuff, if you will. And hoping to keep the weight down, has formed the resolution to run a mile at top speed whenever presented with such an illusion. Time to lose some weight, let's keep running. Or perhaps he thinks he's about to take part in a 1,600-meter race, wants to win, and believes the appearance of the tiger is the starting signal. Or perhaps, cleverly, clearly that there are a number of belief-come-desire systems that equally fit given a bit of this behavior. Trying to combine these probabilities in an appropriate way, it would be reasonable to suppose that the probability of R of these creatures' cognitive systems being reliable is relatively low, somewhat maybe less than a half. Maybe cut it by 50% or something. Now, if we return to Darwin's doubt, the reasoning that applies to these hypothetical creatures, of course, also applies to us. So if we think the probability of R with respect to them is relatively low, given N and E, naturalistic, metaphysical naturalism, and evolutionary cognitive faculties being reliable, we should think the same thing about the probability of R with respect to us. Something like this, perhaps, is what underlay Darwin's doubt. So we need to think that P, R, N, and E for us is low in this case. And if we accept naturalistic atheism and metaphysical naturalism, and E, evolution, cognitive faculties, this gives us a defeater, like defeating somebody, a defeater in debate or philosophical papers. This gives us a defeater for our belief in R, a reason to doubt it. R here is a reason to doubt it, to be agnostic with respect to it. If R, a reason to doubt it, is unlikely or improbable given the way of our faculties, the way they came to be, then we have reason to reject it or withhold R. All right, what's the argument here against naturalism? The doubt developed again, according to Plantinga. Of course, the argument for a low estimate of P, R, N, and E is pretty weak. In particular, our estimates of the various probabilities involved in estimating P, R, N, and E with respect to that hypothetical population were pretty shaky. So perhaps the right course here is simple agnosticism. The probability is inscrutable. We just can't tell what it is when it comes to N, R, and E. All right, this also seems sensible. What would then be the appropriate attitude towards R, specified to that hypothetical population, that other set of beings on another planet similar to us? Someone who accepts naturalistic atheism and metaphysical naturalism, and E, evolution, in the sense of cognitive faculties having been developed by random mutations, also believes then that the proper attitude towards P, R, N, and E is one of agnosticism. Clearly, therefore, has good reasons for being an agnostic about R as well. But suppose we again apply the same sort of reasoning to ourselves and our condition. Suppose we think that N and E is true, for the sake of argument. We ourselves have evolved according to the mechanism suggested by contemporary evolutionary theory, unguided and unorchestrated by God or anyone else. Suppose we think, furthermore, that there is no way to determine P, R, N, and E specified to us. What would be the right attitude to take R seriously? Well, if we have no further information, then wouldn't the right attitude here, just as a respect to that hypothetical population, be agnosticism, withholding belief? Yes, it seems that way. If this probability is inscrutable, inscrutable, then we have a defeater for R, just as in the case where that probability is low. So, therefore, P, R, N, and E is either low or inscrutable, and if we accept metaphysical naturalism and cognitive faculties developed by evolutionary means, then in either case, we have a defeater for R. Some analogies. This is, again, Plantinga talking, he's not quoting here. A believer in God comes to believe that such belief is produced by wish fulfillment. Suppose she, the believer in God, considers the objective probability that wish fulfillment as a belief-producing mechanism is reliable, right? Low or inscrutable, such that we can't tell what it is. In either case, she has a defeater for any belief she takes to be produced by the mechanism in question. Reason to reject it, not to hold to it or withhold it. B, the widgets on the assembly line. All right? The second kind of widget case. Here she doesn't come to believe that the probability of a widget's being red gives that it looks red, like the color red. is low. Instead, she's agnostic about that probability. C, another analogy. You come to think you have been created by a Cartesian demon. We talked about it in a class a few weeks ago, that takes pleasure in deceiving those whom he creates, pre-programming you with false beliefs. For example, similar to that brain in the vat, most of the beliefs held by his creatures are false. Then you have a defeater for any belief you hold. And the same goes whether you think the probability in question is low or inscrutable. But now, suppose we return to the person convinced of metaphysical naturalism and cognitive faculties developed by evolutionary means, N and E, and who is now agnostic about P, R, N, and E. Something similar goes for him. How so? He's in the same position with respect to any belief of his. That's what B stood for earlier. As in the above believer in God. Same thing there. He is in the same condition as the person who comes to think that she has been created by that Cartesian evil demon. So he too has a defeater for B beliefs, and good reason for being agnostic with respect to it. What's the main argument, the thrust of all of this? Now, for the argument that it is irrational to believe in metaphysical naturalism, N-E, P, R, N, and E is either low or inscrutable. In either case, if you accept N and E, you have a defeater for R. And therefore, for any other belief, which stands B, B is belief, and therefore for any belief B you might hold. But B might not be N and E, naturalistic, metaphysical naturalism, and E, evolutionary means again, itself. So one who accepts N and E has a defeater now for N and E. Is, again, an evolutionary argument against naturalism. A reason to doubt or be agnostic with respect to it. If he has no independent evidence, N and E is self-defeating and therefore irrational. Could he get a defeater? Rot in this thereafter. A defeater in so. How? Maybe by doing some science, for example, determining by scientific means that his faculties really are reliable. But of course, that would presuppose that his faculties are reliable. If a man's honesty were called into question, it would be ridiculous to refer to that man's own words, because of course he's going to say, I'm honest, whether he be honest or not. The same absurdity there is in attempting to prove by any kind of reasoning, probable or demonstrative, that our reason is not fallacious, since the very point in question is whether reasoning may be trusted, given N and E, right? Is there any sensible way at all which he can argue for R? An argument he might produce will have premises, and these premises, he claims, give him good reason to believe R, that this or that is. But of course, he has the very same defeater for each of those premises that he has for R. So this defeater, therefore, cannot be defeated. We could also put it like this. Any argument he offers for R is circular and question-begging. Naturalistic evolution gives its adherents a reason for doubting that our beliefs are mostly true. Perhaps they are mostly mistaken, for the very reason for mistrusting our cognitive faculties generally. Will be a reason for mistrusting the faculties that produce belief in the goodness of the argument. Hence, the devotee of N and E has a defeater, D, for N and E. A defeater, furthermore, that can't be defeated. So N and E is self-defeating, self-refuting, can't fulfill its own standard, and can't rationally be accepted. One who contemplates accepting N, say naturalistic, metaphysical naturalism, and is torn, let's say, between metaphysical naturalism and theism, would reason as follows. If I were to accept metaphysical naturalism, I would have good and ultimately defeated reason to be agnostic about N. So I shouldn't accept it. An argument for the irrationality of N, not for its falsehood. One who contemplates accepting N, again, let's say between atheism in this sense, and theism would reason as follows. Follow this again. If I were to accept naturalistic atheism, metaphysical naturalism, I would have good and ultimately defeated reasons to be agnostic about that very worldview. So I shouldn't accept it. The negation here is brilliant. So the traditional theist, on the other hand, has no corresponding reason for doubting that it is a purpose of our cognitive faculties or systems to produce true beliefs, nor any reason for thinking the probability of a belief being true, given that it is the product of her or his cognitive faculties, is low or inscrutable. She may indeed endorse some form of evolution, but if she does, it will be a form of evolution guided and orchestrated by God. And qua traditional theists, say Jewish, Christian, Muslim, etc., she believes that God is the premier knower and has created us, human beings, in His image, an important part of which involves His giving them, His creatures, what is needed to have knowledge, just as He does. The conclusion to be drawn, therefore, is that the conjunction of naturalism with evolutionary theory is self-defeating. It provides for itself an undefeated defeater. It is therefore unacceptable and irrational. If you've read along the reading in the philosophy book, some of this language at this point should be somewhat more, easy to understand, I suppose. If we started off the course with this paper, most people would drop the class. But in any event, Plantinga, when he took on the topic of evolution, believe me, the Darwinists were nervous, because he really goes to town, really in a brilliant way, and takes his task seriously, takes his whole trade seriously. So, great author, great philosopher. There's another lecture for you. Hope you understand it. Meanwhile, we'll talk to you soon. Blessings.